Have you ever been judged harshly? Yeah, don't look beside you, but have you ever been judged harshly? I believe I was. It was within the first couple years I was here, somewhere in 99, 2000, 2001, something like that. The original sanctuary, the sound booth had a little small window in it. Volunteers ran all of our sound back then. I don't remember the occasion, Sunday night service, maybe a Sunday night service or something like that. But something went wrong. And I ran upstairs and reached across the soundboard in front of Jim and changed something on that soundboard. Maybe unmuted a mic or muted a mic, something like that. Probably something simple as that. I don't remember. But I do remember what came after that. A very judgmental man that basically did not have anything to do with me for the rest of his life. I was not his pastor anymore. I had disrespected him, and he would never let that go. Now, did I do something wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely. I should have just said something to him. I should have said, Jim, mute this mic or unmute, whatever it is. No, I just did that. Just reached across him. Do I believe I was judged too harshly? Actually, I do. Actually, I do believe I was judged too harshly for a judgment mistake. But this actually leads to a deeper question. What happens if you're not just judged harshly, but you're judged wrongly? Well, we got a couple generations in our group, so I'm going to show you a generational example, right? David Jansen and Harrison Ford. David Jansen, Harrison Ford. Those of us my age know that David Jansen was the original fugitive, and Harrison Ford was the modern fugitive in the movie. Jansen was it was a series. Dr. Kimball was basically convicted of murdering his wife. And he kept saying that the one-armed man was the one that killed her, right? In the movie, it comes out pretty quickly. Within an hour, 2 hours or whatever, we get the full picture, and he's exonerated in the end. But he was judged wrongly. Do y'all know who the original series, Fugitive, was based off of? A guy named Sam Shepard. He was a neurosurgeon in Cleveland. In 1954, his wife was beaten to death. She was pregnant with 4 months into her pregnancy, beaten to death in their Cleveland home. And it took about 26 days, somewhere like that, before the authorities brought charges against him. But the local newspaper had headlines, "Why is Sam Shepard not arrested yet?" So he was convicted literally in the court of public opinion long before the police arrested him. The coroner had an open inquisition to the autopsy in a gym that anybody could come to. When they finally brought Sam to trial, reporters were allowed, everybody was allowed in. The jury was not sequestered. So the jury could go home every night, pick up the paper the next day, and read stuff that was in the paper. He was convicted. Second-degree murder, life in prison. The Supreme Court reversed that decision based on the carnival-type atmosphere that happened. But that didn't happen until 1966. But that Supreme Court case was sort of what some people will look back and say, this is why we don't have juries just going home every night without have some kind of sequestration for some of these big things, right? So he second trial, he was actually not convicted. And the guy that he kept talking about that beat him, that knocked him out a couple times, was a bushy-haired guy that they finally were able to introduce evidence that there was somebody else at the scene. He wasn't completely exonerated, truthfully. They never did convict another person for that murder, although one person was identified through DNA, blood, or whatever, but that guy was convicted of another murder. Shepherd never was able to clear his name. His son actually tried to clear his name, wasn't able to do that. But Shepherd, because of this whole experience, after he's released, after the Supreme Court decision, the retrial, 4 years later, in 1970, he was dead. Alcoholism. I mean, it is a sad story. But this is the case of somebody being wrongly judged. But what happens if the guilt is undeniable? What happens to a person that there's no doubt that they did it? Well, Jesus gives us a story today in John chapter 8. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple court where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. They were using it as a trap. So here we know something real quickly, right? Something we must not overlook, and that is the law. The law is pretty clear. In fact, Deuteronomy tells us about this law. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from Israel. And how was this purging done? Through stoning. Through stoning. This is not the modern day being stoned. This is actually real rocks, okay? Just so you'll know. It's not an OD thing, all right? So what's going on here? What's going on here? Why are they trapping him? Because that's what the deal is. John tells us they were trying to trap Jesus. So this whole thing was a setup. It was a scheme to go at Jesus. And here's the deal. They didn't care, the Pharisees didn't care of how this came about. They just wanted Jesus discredited. They just wanted Jesus to put himself in a pickle, basically, to where he couldn't get out of it. And they didn't care if that pickle was with the Jewish people or the Romans. Either one. If he was able to get the Jewish people upset with him, their problem was solved. If he could get the Romans to be upset with Jesus, then they would take him out. Because it's all centered around of this whole deal, right? Because here's we want you to understand. The Romans did not allow for capital punishment in this type of offense. The Romans did not allow for capital punishment. The Mosaic Law we just read did. They wanted Jesus to choose right then and there between justice and mercy. That's what they wanted him to do. They'd already gone against their procedure. They only brought one party involved. They didn't bring both parties. So that was already an issue. Then they did this in public. Again, no matter which way he answered, somebody should be mad at him. Either the Romans were going to take him out or the Jewish people would not like him and turn their backs on him and not listen to him anymore. And of course, they brought this lady, this pawn in their game. They bought her with no concern at all for what was next for her. So how did Jesus respond? How did Jesus respond? Knowing what their motives were, either to get people from the Jewish community to not want to follow him anymore or get the Romans to take him out. How did Jesus respond? He bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. You know, Jesus had already been judged by people before this, at least according to John. Right? He was throwing the judgment back at these Pharisees, but he had literally already been judged. I want to read you a couple excerpts from the previous chapter of chapter 7. The Jews, the people, were amazed at this man, amazed at Jesus, because he had such learning without having been taught. So they were already sort of judging him because he had not gone to quote-unquote rabbi school. So they were already questioning his ability to teach. They also believed he was demon-possessed, verse 20 of chapter 7. You were demon-possessed, the crowd says. They were judging him on some of the things he was doing. Then 27, but we know where this man comes from. When the Messiah comes, no one will know where he comes from, where he is from. So they already questioned where his claim to be who he says he is. And then even right after this story in verse 13, the Pharisees basically called him a liar. Here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. So he had already been judged by Pharisees, already been judged by the people at this point. And he's still in the midst of being judged. And they keep on questioning him. And he's writing. He's writing on the ground. We have no idea what he's writing. People have loved to talk about this. Spend countless paragraphs writing about what he's writing about. And we have no idea. We can suggest things, right? Is he writing down all the sins of people? Is he writing down the law? You know, is he just doodling? I don't know. What's he doing? Is he just like killing time? As he's letting them, sort of letting the moment build type thing? Who knows? But what we do know is he turned the judgment back on them. He turns the judgment back on them. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Now this is really not anything new. What he just said is in keeping with his teaching already. Let me refresh your memory a little bit. We looked at the Beatitudes, the first few verses of Matthew chapter 5, that Sermon on the Mount, all the blessed are's. And that whole message that Jesus had on that Sermon on the Mount was to who? Was to disciples. It was to his disciples. He gathered his disciples to him, ended up having a lot of people listening, but he really gathered his disciples to him because what he was getting ready to teach them was different than what was normally taught, right? The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' challenge to his disciples, to those who choose to follow him. That Sermon on the Mount was a challenge that, hey, we have to think differently. We have to live differently. What has been working, what you think has been working with the traditional Jewish laws is not working anymore. In fact, it never has worked truthfully, at least not in the recent memory. So he's challenging them to think differently and act differently. That's why he says, talking about this, when you're looking at someone else, you got to look at yourself too. When you're looking at someone else, when you're judging someone else, you got to look at yourself too. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So this was a challenge. Challenge for people to think differently as it pertains to going after someone else. To make a judging claim on someone else, you got to think differently. Same thing here. Same thing with this passage. And this actually makes me think of a question, right? That can we be discerning without being judgmental? We're going to come back to that in just a second. Can we be discerning without being judgmental? Because here's the case I think many of us fall into. That we do judge people. Now, we may not use the word judge. We may use the word compare. The thought of comparing, we compare ourselves to someone else. We may say something, well, at least I haven't done this. And you name that person who has done that. Or at least I haven't said this, and you name what they said. At least I give more than they do. We get into this comparison game, then we're going down a slippery slope, aren't we? And that's what Jesus is challenging us here. You know, this is a challenge for me. Can I just admit to you that I talk to people. I know you don't realize that, but I actually talk to people sort of regularly. Sometimes people actually want to talk to one of their pastors, and every now and then some of you will talk to me, right? Many times when I'm talking to people and those people are in a relationship with someone else, I only get one side of the story. Same as you, truthfully, don't you? If you think about it, when you're getting in conversations with people, maybe somebody has a difficult time in their life and they're sharing with you, how many of you just get one side of the story? And so that's a challenge for me when one person comes in and they're concerned about a relationship and I don't hear from the other person. So I'm supposed to be impartial. I'll try to be impartial, but I'm listening and engaging with this person, and I can make educated guesses, can't I? You know, I can make some assumptions, but I'm really only knowing part of the story. And that's difficult. That's difficult, particularly when after that conversation, I'm trying to think about what is next. What kind of advice can I give? What kind of direction can I give? I think, and also emotions plays a part in this, right? We cannot. I don't think hardly any of us in this room can take emotions out of the equation when we're dealing with people and when we're talking with people and we're sharing life with people. It's hard to take emotions out. That impacts how we react, and it impacts how we act. Why do you think that there is so much work done for appointing judges? Because both sides of the political strings know that nobody can actually take their emotions out. Yeah, judges are supposed to be impartial, but we know you can't really do that all the time. That's why there's such debates over the appointment of judges. You know who can take emotion out of the equation? You know who can do that? God. God takes emotion out of the equation. Because when God looks at us, He's looking at us through the lens of holiness. He is looking at us through the lens of holiness, not feeling. Which leads me back to my question. Can we be discerning without being judgmental? And I believe this. We can avoid judgment, but it doesn't mean we avoid assistance. Avoiding judgment doesn't mean we avoid assistance. Because here's the deal. We allow the Holy Spirit to work in us to help us to discern when it comes to other people. We ask the Holy Spirit to help us discern on how we can be helpful on another person's journey. Couple weeks ago, we had a men's event and stuff, and we were challenged, right, in that event, because there's a number of guys who are right now trying to lead our men's ministry that understand this, right? They understand this principle of men walking alongside of each other, not in judgment, but of helping to push and encourage a person down the path of holiness, truthfully, but a path of being more like Jesus. So I've had men in my life that done that. I've had men in my life that have encouraged me and pushed me. I have them now in my life. That's holding me accountable to being the man that God has called me to be, to being the pastor that God has called me to be being the husband that God has called me to be the father that God has called me to be the disciple that God has called me to be. See, Jesus said this is a narrow path. Following Jesus is a narrow path. And many times in our life, we need somebody to come alongside us to make sure we do not get off the wide side, to push us back to the narrow. The Celebrate Recovery 12 Steps programs, Celebrate Recovery is here every Thursday night. I know that there's men and women each and every Thursday night that are helping each other. Not just Thursday nights, but each day of the week to make sure they stay on their road to recovery. We have men and women, really some of the whole groups, they will do that. They will come alongside, encourage each other during the days and during the weeks, the days in between the meetings. And they will encourage. They have sponsors that will call, that will be there 24/7. Why? Because they know it's not a judgy thing. It's like, what do we need to do to keep you on this road to recovery? What do you need from me? I will be there for you to do that. So we avoid judgment, but we don't avoid assistance to another person. But these righteous dudes that literally came to Jesus, most likely holding a stone. These righteous dudes came. They weren't willing to help this lady. No. They were coming to judge. They were coming to judge. And Jesus reminds them, go ahead, stoners, throw your stone, but only if you've not sinned. But only if you've not sinned. Those of you without sin, go ahead, throw it. And at that, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Basically, those guys with the rocks in their hands just dropped them and left. I've read this story a few times. Never gave a lot of thought to the older ones until this week. Older ones. Why did the older ones leave early? Why were they the first to leave? Because Jesus said, those without sin. So the older ones, here's what I think. Well, there's an old adage that goes something like this: the older I get, the more I know the more I learn that I don't know everything, or something like that, right? You heard that adage. The more older I get, the more I realize I don't know everything. You learn as you get older that there's a lot you need to learn, right? Here's the deal. As you get older, you realize just how many times you've messed up. And as the older you get, that list just keeps getting longer and longer. So the older ones, they knew. They had a lifetime of looking back. I went, yep, that's the case with me. Yeah, I can't throw it, because I've had a lot in my life. I don't know about you. When I was younger, 18, 19, 20, and somebody told me, Look back at the sin in your life, son. What do you see? Not a lot. Maybe a little. But fast forward 40 more years. How much time do you got? How much time do you got? You see, I think those of us who are really honest with ourselves, those of us who are thinking that we have it all together, who are thinking that we know what it means to follow Jesus and we've got this down and we sort of have this self-righteous air about us. I think if we're really, really honest with ourselves and we look at our lives, we'll realize this, that those who measure others discover they don't measure up themselves. Those who measure others discover they don't measure up themselves. Jesus addressed this. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And I don't know about you, but if I'm going to be measured, you know how I want to be measured? By grace. I don't want to be measured by law. Because if I be measured by law, then I'd be a lot of people throwing that at me. In fact, if I was measured by law, I would not be here today. If I was be measured by law, I would not be your pastor. If I was measured by law, there's a really good chance I would be on my own. If I was measured by law, I would be begging my mother, please let me stay with you. But I was not measured by law. I was measured by grace. Yes, the grace of God first and foremost, but the grace of God working through the grace of Hayes McKay Jr. Yes, the grace of God, but grace of God working through my wife. The grace of God working through the men that have come alongside of me. Give me that every time. Give me that every time. How you measuring up? I love what Jesus said. He straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. No one. Jesus didn't leave her in her guilt. The last word in her life was not guilt. He said, "Has no one condemned you?" No. The last word for her was not guilt. Because see, when you come face to face with Jesus, you come face to face with grace and forgiveness. With grace and forgiveness. Publicly shamed. Publicly brought in front of not just the religious leaders, but her community. The people that she lived with. The people she went to draw water with. She was shamed. She was guilted publicly. But Jesus didn't leave that guilt with her because he said, "Neither do I condemn you. Neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave your life of sin." He gave her another chance. He was telling her, make the most of it. Do the next right thing. This story still leaves us a choice today. This story leaves us with a choice today. All right? Are we going? There it is. I knew I dropped it somewhere. So, are we going to be the person holding the stone? Are we going to be the person that holds the stone and drops it, but is still self-righteous? Or will we be the ones that leave our lives of sin and embrace the grace that Jesus offers. The words of Jesus are as appropriate then as they are now. Go now and leave your life of sin. See, that's an invitation not just for her, but for me and you. Romans 8:1 says, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So Jesus doesn't condemn us. Understand this, understand. Jesus does not condemn us. Jesus did not condemn this lady. So he was trying to get her to understand that there should be no more guilt for you, lady. There should be no more guilt for you. However, just because there's no condemnation doesn't mean that there's not consequences. No condemnation does not equal no consequences. We still have to live in the world. See, this lady was told, go back, leave your life of sin. But she'd already been publicly humiliated, publicly outed. Everybody knew she had the scarlet letter. She had the scarlet letter. Okay, I dated myself, so those of you probably 40 and younger, you might want to go Google scarlet letter and understand what that is. All right? Just Google it, you'll find out. There's still lasting effects. There's still lasting effects. You remember Moses, old dude, led people out of Egypt, right? He never got to go to the promised land. He never got to go because there was consequences to his actions earlier. He was still God's chosen one to lead. God still welcomed him. But because of his actions and his disregard for God on a couple occasions, God says, you cannot go into the promised land like all my other people of Israel will get to go to. You may remember the thief on the cross. Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. Great, Jesus. Will you get me off the cross? No, you still got to face the consequences of what you've done. There was no condemnation for the thief on the cross. He was going to be in paradise, but he still had to face the consequences. Still had to face the consequences. So my question for you today, we're going to spend some time for you to come and kneel at the altar, kneel at the kneeling rails if you want. This time's going to be open to you as we close out our time today. But what stones do you need to drop? What stones do you need to drop? What sin do you need to leave behind? Are you ready to accept the grace of Jesus and do the next right thing? This is a choice. That woman had that choice long ago, and that's still our choice today. So when you come, what stones you need to drop? You need to accept the grace of God. You know, if you need to accept that grace of God anew and afresh today, you know a great way to sort of solidify and remember? We got the communion elements right there. We believe in the Wesleyan Methodist tradition that God shows himself. That's a time of showing his grace through the taking of the elements, the bread and the juice. So if you need to refresh yourself about receiving God's grace, you might want to just take the communion as you kneel at the rails. What stones do you need to drop? What sin are you called to leave behind? Are you ready to accept God's grace and do the next right thing?